welcome to another weekly Wednesday Kickstarter roundup from Rule of Carnage, bringing together all the best that Kickstarter has for the tabletop miniatures gamer. And it's a very exciting week on Kickstarter this week. Loads of physical model reward campaigns, loads of game campaigns, so much so that I've had to really strip out the STL file campaigns, and I've even cut out some physical reward and game campaigns. That's how much it's been this week, so it's really exciting, really cool to see. I would think that this is a little spike to try and catch people prior to Christmas before we go very quiet. But yeah, really interesting week. Loads of really cool projects. We'll launch straight in with the first of those game campaigns, which is Return of the Tripods by Abbey Normal Media. For anyone who isn't aware, All Quiet on the Martian Front is a asymmetrical skirmish up to mass battle sized game recreating the events or extending the events of H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds. It's a really cool, very interesting system made by some of the top names in game design, and it has a fascinating hidden unit mechanic to it that's well worth looking into. This Kickstarter is for a second edition of All Quiet on the Martian Front, which isn't necessarily immediately obvious from the title of the campaign. So in the event that you are a fan or you're interested or curious in All Quiet on the Martian Front, and you've maybe gone, oh, Return of the Tripods, and scanned over it, it's time to take a little look back. So the system itself is very cool, very interesting. The campaign, currently, the Return of the Tripods campaign, appears to be a real sort of extension of the universe, as well as the second edition. The armies are made larger. It looks like there's more of an emphasis on the sort of mass battle play of the original. Now, it's hard to tell from the campaign. There doesn't seem to be sort of offered on the campaign page beta rule set. Hopefully they're still keeping in the hidden movement mechanics and ambush elements of the original, which are, I think, what made it sort of so interesting and unique. But if they've extended that out into a larger universe and a larger scope of games, then I think this has got to be a solid winner of a game system and well worth checking out. So yeah, very interesting. They haven't funded yet. They haven't been up for an enormous amount of time, and that's, I think, partly because they're asking for a quite substantial goal. But they've got plenty of time to complete it, and they are on a reasonable arc to get there, so I think they'll manage it by the end of the campaign. But if you are interested in the second edition of All Quiet on the Martian Front, or you'd just like to pick up some smaller scale alternative history Weird World War style miniatures, stop there by this campaign and definitely give it a back. Okay, next up for our game campaigns this week, we've got ArcWorlde Duel of the Dead by Warp Miniatures. So ArcWorlde is a narrative, story-driven skirmish game, miniatures game that has been doing very nicely for itself for a little while now. This campaign is for a couple of additional, actually a handful of additional undead factions for the system. I always think, looking at the ArcWorlde miniatures, is they put me a bit in mind of something like Terry Pratchett's Discworld. There's a sort of a fun narrative feel to the look of the game, and I think that sort of carries through over into the sort of the overall ideal of playing something like ArcWorlde, where, you know, it's a bit collaborative in the storytelling structure, it's very narrative in its scenarios, which is super cool, and it's lovely to have a game that leans into a little bit of the sort of the humour and the excitement and the storytelling of a game, if that's what you're looking for. So I think that if you're interested in a more light-hearted, more narrative feeling miniatures skirmish level, warband level game, if you haven't yet picked up ArcWorlde, then this is a great campaign to get in on it. There are starter set levels available. Obviously, if you're already a fan of ArcWorlde, then picking up some extra factions, extending out into the undead is, you know, a bit of a no-brainer. But if you haven't experienced it yet and you are looking for something in that sort of Moonstone, sort of slightly more quirky, the more peculiar sort of fun end of the fantasy skirmish game market. I think that ArcWorlde is a great one to get into. This is a great campaign to pick it up, get started, get rolling with one of the sort of the 2-player starter sets, and check out another skirmish game set if you haven't already started playing it. Okay, next up for our game campaigns, we've got Dead Man's Hand Redux 2nd edition starter set by Great Escape Games. Well, this is a campaign that's doing really well so far, and I don't think it's an enormous surprise. Dead Man's Hand is a very well regarded sort of skirmish level Western sort of frontiers shootout style game. It's a really solid system. It's been going for a while. This is the 2nd edition, so you know that it's a system that's been well tested, and frankly it was well regarded in its 1st edition. It's a popular, solid system, so getting a 2nd edition where they've taken all that feedback and they've sort of readjusted and rejigged the rules is going to make it a really, really solid game. I think if you aren't yet sort of playing Dead Man's Hand, or you don't own it, or you haven't sort of seen it, this is an easy one to pick up. It's a really solid, really interesting system. Even if you're not super into the idea of, you know, Western shootouts, I think it's well worth checking out. It's got an interesting sort of card-driven sort of system, and I think that's always an area that could do with more examination and more options. If obviously you are already a fan of Dead Man's Hand, then I think you're probably going to end up picking this up either way, but I think it's well worth checking out if you're interested in sort of skirmish narrative games. I think it's an obvious pickup if you're interested in sort of Western style settings, and I think frankly it's a really, you know, solid one to pick up if you're just interested in skirmish wargaming that has sort of interesting mechanics that match in with their setting, and yeah, are very sort of solid, well, you know, covered and well supported. So yeah, definitely check this one out. Okay, last up for our game campaigns, we've got Revelations Skirmish, a 3D printable combined arms wargame by White Light Media. So from a couple of well-established and, you know, even 2nd edition skirmish games to one that's much newer but no less interesting and worth checking out for that. Revelation Skirmish is a combined arms sci-fi futuristic skirmish game. Particularly it's built around sort of putting together mechs and walkers and tanks and infantry and trying to give them each sort of different roles on the battlefield. So you've got mechs that have sort of a range of, you know, grabs and grapples and sort of different options. You've got your infantry that you want to be occupying locations, doing that sort of thing, and the tanks and sort of mobile artillery that have a bit more solidity, a bit fewer options, and a bit less sort of tactical flexibility maybe. So it's an interesting combined armed system, certainly. The rules are available to download from their website, so you can give it a check out and a try before you buy. So I think there's really absolutely no reason to not stop by the campaign, follow the link, and download the rule set. Who doesn't want another, you know, rule set, free PDF available to check through and see what they're doing and see what ideas they've got going on? I think if you are interested in the idea of combined arms as a thing to play out on the tabletop, I think they've got some really interesting things going in. I've read through the rule set, and I think there are some really interesting bits there, the way they've managed to sort of put together the different sections of the army and make them all relevant and make it so that it's not about sort of stacking or min-maxing one type of unit or another, I think is well worth looking into, well worth checking out. Even if you're not super into sci-fi, you know, I think that the ideas there, the combined arms concepts, are something that exists sort of across various games. Not every game manages to do it, you know, particularly well, and I think this is an interesting shot at it and well worth checking out. Okay, so that is it for our game campaigns. Quite a few of them there. Onto the physical model rewards, and there are a lot of physical model reward campaigns this week. I don't know where they've all come from. I've really tried to thin them down, but there are just too many good ones. So, we're going to go through quite a few of them, and they're all cool in one way or another. And first up of those is The Great Northern War by Warbear Studios. This is a campaign for a set of historical miniatures, and a solid army's worth, I think, of the army of Peter the Great. So, sort of 1700s Russian army, and the sculpts I think are really lovely. I think particularly the character sculpts of the commanders of the day, I think are, really, really nice, right up there. Lots of character. I recognise a few of the commanders. I'm not, a huge historic sort of gamer or historian, but I immediately recognised a few of the commanders from the sculpts. So I think that's a really, solid indication of the level of detail and research and sort of attention to detail that's gone into these sculpts. The rest of the pieces are really great as well. I think if you are a historic gamer, if you have any even passing interest in that sort of period, I think that this is a sort of insta-back for picking up the various pieces. It's available on a physical and digital level, so if you are not looking for a high investment of a whole physical army of miniatures, you can pick up the digital level, print them off yourself, get them printed off in the future, or maybe just a few bits and pieces. I think that aside, the sort of the non-character models, I think give you a good deal of flexibility. I think these guys could be dropped into a sort of a range of historical settings if you're not sort of super concerned with everything being perfectly accurate. And the sculpts are nice enough and solid enough and good looking enough that it's probably worth considering that. But certainly, if you are a historic gamer interested in this period, stop by, back this campaign straight up. If you are a historic gamer with a bit of flexibility, drop by, give it a look over. And if you're interested in alternative sort of history options, if you're mucking about with a bit of, things like Silver Bayonet or Turnip 28, and you'd like some really nice sculpts from an unusual history and an unusual period, stop by, give it a back. Really solid campaign, lovely sculpts. Okay, next up for our physical model rewards, we've got 28mm Border Reaver miniatures by Ian MacDonald. So, if you're not aware of the Border Wars period, it's around the 1500s where Scotland and England were engaging in sort of constant clashes across the border. Border Wars is a really cool independent skirmish miniature system based around those clashes. And if you haven't seen it, you haven't picked it up, I'd strongly suggest stopping by this Kickstarter to check out the rule set, if nothing else, because it is a nice rule set and it is a really interesting period of history. This particular campaign is for a set of new miniatures for that setting, for that period, and obviously for that system. So if you're interested in that period, if you're interested in a slightly more unusual sort of setting, but one that's rich in history and rich particularly, I think, in realistic conflict, well worth checking it out for that. If you're already a fan of Border Wars, I would think you're already stopping by and back in this campaign. But I think particularly for the miniatures alone, they're really nice sculpts, and they have an awful lot of utility because, yeah, obviously they're great for the Border Wars system. That's what they've been built for. There are a lot of these guys that would work absolutely fantastically for something like Lion Rampant. I think particularly the Houndmasters, there's a Houndmaster unit with some hounds, I think give a lot of options for things like Frostgrave. I think generally the size of the units and the sort of the setting would make them work really brilliantly for something like Saga. So there's a lot of units in here that have a lot of utility across a whole bunch of independent miniatures agnostic or miniatures agnostic adjacent systems. So yeah, stop by, check out Border Wars, it's a cool system. check out the miniatures. There's a whole bunch of units here that could be used in a whole bunch of different settings, a lot of independent systems, and yeah, a lot of really cool miniatures that have a lot of uses. So definitely stop by, check this one out. Alright, next up for our physical model reward campaigns, we've got the Cyber Samurai Dynasty, a 3D printable army by Dungeons and Dreadnoughts. This is an interesting campaign, and for me it's quite interestingly presented. At the moment they haven't yet reached their funding goal, or I think they've got plenty of time to do it. They're around 50% funded, and there's way more than 50% of the campaign left, so I do think they're going to get there. But I wonder if whether the presentation has slightly sort of put people back. So, as I said from the title of the campaign, it says a 3D printable army. It's also available in physical sculpt, so you don't have to be picking up the STL files. You've got both options, which personally I would have sort of put more up front, because, you know, not everybody has a 3D printer, although obviously some people do, so you want to get both those things across. Also, it's presented as being sort of connected to the one-page rules grimdark system. I think these miniatures have a lot more utility than that. They're sort of very mechanical, sort of mech-looking warriors, although they are set to be sort of human scale within the campaign. I think these guys would work really nicely in any miniatures agnostic mech based game, something like Gamma Wolves, something of that nature. I think these miniatures would work. I think they would proxy in any sort of extreme far future tech based army. They have a bit of a feeling of something like Tau or something adjacent to that, obviously from the title of the campaign, with a sort of Far Eastern styling. So I think really any minis agnostic far future sci-fi game, these would work really nicely. I think they'd work great for any sort of mech based game where you can fiddle with the scale a little bit, and I think they're just really nice, fully sort of self-contained IP, and from a first-time creator on Kickstarter, I think these are a really cool set of minis, well worth checking out and well worth supporting to encourage more from that creator in the future. So well worth stopping by this one, giving it a look over and considering the different systems and different options that you would actually have available if you pick them up. Okay, next up for our physical reward campaigns, we've got the Orcs of Inneath, 32mm resin kits and pre-supported STL by Durgin Paintforge. This is a campaign for some really lovely, unusual and very, very characterful sculpts. So as the campaign suggests, it's primarily a sort of a collection of orcs, maybe ogre adjacent, and some goblins. Generally, I think if you scan over the campaign at first, these will possibly feel a bit more RPG-y than wargamey, but there are enough miniatures in the campaign for a warband skirmish level system, and the sculpts have got so much character to them, so much feel to them, that I think it's absolutely well worth giving them an opportunity, figuring out a system they're working and give them a chance. I think visit the campaign, look at the sculpts, and you'll absolutely see what I'm talking about. Again, and funny enough, given that I was talking about ArcWorlde at the start of the video, I think these guys have a very strong Discworld feel to them. There is some of the newer Discworld art that absolutely feels like these guys could be plucked out and dropped into the Ankh-Morpork City Guard, which I absolutely love. I love that world, and I love that sense to them. They also have a feel of maybe a sort of Jim Henson sort of potential world. So if you are gaming something like Moonstone, I think these guys would drop in really, really nicely. I think if you're gaming any sort of minis agnostic fantasy warband skirmish level game, these guys are well worth giving an opportunity, just because they have such a strong look and such a cool, fun, interesting, unusual look. If you are interested in ArcWorlde from the start of the video, I think these guys would drop right into ArcWorlde. I think they'd fit right in with the aesthetic of that game and the sense of the miniatures. This is one that I think you want to stop by, you want to look at the miniatures, you want to consider this sort of unusual art style and unusual feel to them, and find a place for them in your collection, because they're super cool, they're well worth checking out and well worth picking up. And again, STL or physical reward available, so you've got extra options there. Okay, next up for our physical reward campaigns, we have got For the Glory of Rome, Set 1 by Chris Abbey at Sally Forth. So I'll start by saying Sally Forth are a super reliable repeat creator on Kickstarter. I think over 23 odd campaigns, very reliable, as solid a guarantee as you can get really on Kickstarter. So well worth checking out for that. This particular campaign is for a set of Roman soldiers, 28mm metal from the Germania campaign, if you want to get quite specific on your Roman soldiers, with loads of detail and, you know, the solid sculpting that you get from a repeat creator with a popular following, and yeah, tons of historical detail, loads of accuracy. Really lovely, very paintable painter's miniatures. So look, certainly if you are interested in historical gaming, ancient historicals, this is an easy one. This is easily back. Stop by, pick up the miniatures. If you are interested, obviously, I would say again, in alternative history gaming, weird historicals, something like Broken Legion. Again, you know, give these guys a look over. It's, as I say, a very solid creator with some lovely sculpts, well worth considering and picking up. If you're gaming in something in the more sort of agnostic level, I think that Romans are an inherently iconic army and an inherently iconic sort of set of units. Whether you're playing Hail Caesar or Gangs of Rome or something of that nature, or whether you're playing sort of fantasy, I think that they sort of have a strong feel to them, have a strong sense to them. So I think they will actually drop into a lot of minutes agnostic games. You know, Romans have a sort of heavy infantry feel to them. Yeah, well worth checking out. If you're interested, obviously, in sort of historic settings, stop by, pick these guys up. That's a no-brainer. If you're interested in sort of weird historicals and weird settings, pick them up. And maybe if you're not playing a system they're attached to, find one and play it. And if you're interested in sort of fancy, minutes agnostic, give them a look over, check them out, just for the sort of iconic nature of the warriors that they are. Yeah, well worth checking this one out, well worth giving it a look over. Okay, next up for our physical model rewards, we have got The Lost Legion by Dark Art Studios. So, as I was talking about the iconic nature of Roman legionnaires and Roman soldiers, and about how they would work quite nicely in a range of miniatures agnostic fantasy settings, the next campaign out this week, Lost Legion, is a set of undead Roman legionnaires. See, it's not, you know, all coincidence. So I think, interestingly, these two campaigns work quite nicely together. I could totally see building up a setting, maybe a homebrew setting, where you've got a set of Roman legionnaires and you've got a set of their undead counterparts, maybe as they're adventuring through a certain setting, a sort of lost city, they, you know, transform. Maybe it's a versus setting. I just think it's nice that there's these two sort of opposing forces available on Kickstarter right now, and you can pick yourself up a sort of bundle deal and build something out of them. That aside, if you are obviously gaming in any of these sort of weird historicals or alternative historicals I was mentioning, you know, just in the previous campaign, like Broken Legions, this Lost Legion are going to work absolutely fantastically for that. If you're gaming sort of general alternative history or miniatures agnostic fantasy, then, as I mentioned before, Romans are very iconic. They have sort of a strong look to them. There's a reason we keep coming back to them. So some undead Roman legionnaires are going to make a really solid, interesting sort of undead force that has a feel of elitism that is sometimes lacking from undead, while still having that sort of inherent undead flavour to them. So I think well worth checking out this campaign. Yeah, if you're interested in homebrewing something unusual with some Romans, if you're interested in alternative historical, or if you're just, a fantasy miniatures agnostic gamer and you fancy putting some fluffy helmets onto your undead skeletons, well worth checking it out. Okay, finally and last up for our physical reward campaigns this week, we have got Dwarf Reinforcements by Red Bard Games. This, I think, is a really interesting campaign because it sort of lists itself up front as old school, old hammer style dwarves. And the style of sculpting of the dwarves absolutely is old hammer. It has all the great things about old hammer. It has a solidness, a cleanness, and a paintability to it that's very, very attractive. But at the same time, these dwarves aren't sort of old hammer units. They're a little bit of modernization. There's board riders and airships, things like that, which weren't available in those old hammer ranges, and give you an option to do something a bit more interesting, maybe with your older dwarf armies or your old hammer armies or whatever it happens to be. Extend out the range a little bit, and it's really lovely, I think, because these sculpts slot right in with those older sculpts you might have hanging around, that more traditional look, but will modernize that army. So you don't, if you already have a dwarf army, have to feel like, I like the sculpts, but I've already got some hammerers, or I've already got some quarrelers, or whatever it happens to be. This gives you the option to go, I can extend out my army. It's giving you the opportunity to buy more minis, and that's kind of what we're all about. So I think if you are a dwarf gamer and you always want something a bit extra, and certainly if you're an old hammer, lover of the old hammer style, stop by this campaign, give it a look over. It's running towards the end of the campaign, so you want to stop by and give it a look sort of as soon as possible. If you're maybe not already entrenched in playing dwarf armies and looking to extend one out, there are some really lovely minis here with a lot of narrative to them, a lot of story. Particularly the airship, I could totally see being the centre of a sort of scenario-driven, narrative-driven skirmish campaign that doesn't necessarily centre on dwarves. I could see a Frostgrave style skirmishing warband piling onto that airship to get from bits of the frozen city to another. So well worth checking out if you're into any kind of miniatures agnostic skirmish level gaming. Obviously check it out if you're a fan of dwarves. Obviously check it out if you're a fan of old hammer style, and certainly old hammer style dwarves. Really lovely miniatures, really lovely sculpts. Okay, that is it for our physical reward campaigns. You wait a while for one to turn up, and then a whole bunch turn up all at once. But there's so many interesting physical reward campaigns this week. I really couldn't leave any of those out. Every one of them has something to offer, something interesting, something unusual. So please check them out and try and give them a back. It's a tough period just before Christmas, and they've all sort of run in at once. So some of, particularly the smaller ones, might be struggling a bit. Because of all those physical rewards, I've stripped down the STL file campaigns this week to just a couple. First up of those is Skeletons vs. Saurians by 3D IP Studios. So as I mentioned, I've stripped the STL file campaigns right down this week, so these ones I really felt I had to feature. This one purely because of the sheer weight of miniatures you've got available here. This is a campaign for two really entire armies worth of fantasy miniatures, as the campaign suggests. An army of skeletons, undead, there are some zombies dotted in there, and some lizardmen, Saurians, whatever you want to call them. And each of the armies has the full range of options available. These are proper full army deals. They've got full units. They've got larger lizards, Croxigor, whatever they happen to be. They've got lizard riders. They've got undead of archers and spearmen and swordsmen, and all of the options available. So if you are looking to start an entire sort of new mass battle fantasy system, and you'd like to pick up a essentially 2-player starter set to get going with a buddy, this is a fantastic campaign to pick up. have 2 armies, get them on tabletop super quickly. If you are obviously interested in lizardmen or skeletons, undead, something of that nature, loads of files here, loads of options, loads of utility. You can dot a few units into an existing force, you can build the entire force. Obviously, if you're playing anything of a skirmish or warband level or below, you're going to have masses of options here. This is a large set of files, really nice sculpts for a pair of really popular and interesting armies. So a solid option to pick up a whole bunch of sculpts all in one go for a couple of large armies. So definitely check that one out. And our other STL file campaign for this week is Federation of Tyr 3D printable files for tabletop and RPGs by Joseph Kujawski. I'm not sure exactly why, but we've recently gotten a lot of sci-fi dwarf forces on Kickstarter, and this is another one. I keep mentioning them because they're super cool, and these ones are super cool. So yeah, they're a set of power armored or power armor like adjacent dwarves. I think this campaign there's a solid number of units. I would say for a sort of smallish mass battle game, you've got enough units, enough miniatures to cover that. Definitely anything of the skirmishing sort of level, large warband level, you've got plenty of options there. Every one of these miniatures has loads of character. They do feel like their own sort of IP rather than necessarily sort of jumping on somebody else's, but I think they would slot into a lot of other armies without feeling sort of too unusual or too off kilter. Certainly, if you are playing Space Dwarves, you are going to accept that if you want a large army, you're going to do a bit of mix and matching. But these guys, I think the quality stands out, in the right way, even if you are mixing it up. And these guys, every one of them could be a character within a larger army, and you wouldn't question it just because of the quality of the sculpt and the quality of the detail. Lots of dynamism in the posing, lots of a sense of action, a sense of weight to the heavy sort of weapon dwarves. Really lovely top-end sculpt. If you are interested, obviously, in Space Dwarves, stop by Instabacket. If you are interested in sci-fi, minis agnostic, if you're interested in cool miniatures in a sci-fi setting, stop by and check this campaign out. Okay, that's it for our standard STL file rewards. As usual, we've got a Pay What You Want campaign, and our Pay What You Want campaign for this week is Medieval Peasant Village 3D printable STL files by New Leaf 3D. So New Leaf 3D are a repeat Pay What You Want creator, and is so often the case of repeat Pay What You Want creators. This campaign comes with a Pay What You Want level and then upgrade levels. So the base level is a small thatched peasant sort of building, something with tons of utility to it. This is going to be sort of fitting into really any historic or fantasy setting you care to think of. It's a sort of building that you could repeat print this and it would look fine, there being tons of them on tabletop. And then the campaign obviously has its upgrade levels. Upgraded through, there's a solid sort of peasant-y village, hamlet, settlements worth of buildings available in this campaign. As I say, a repeat creator, a reliable creator, one that's put out campaigns like this multiple times before and delivered. So this is a really solid campaign. It's as close to a guarantee as you can really get on Kickstarter. If you are picking up Pay What You Want files, if you're building up a library, looking to sort of grab things, at a low price, this is a great one. This building is going to fit into every setting you can sort of imagine almost. It's going to be great to have on the library. You're going to pull it out multiple times. So well worth checking out, well worth giving it back, and I would argue well worth upgrading through to the higher levels. If you're looking to fill out a tabletop with sort of, a bit of a peasant settlement, if you're interested in historic gaming, something like Saga, if you're interested in fantasy gaming at a sort of skirmish level, loads of options here, loads of utility, well worth checking out the campaign. Okay, that is going to be it for this week. I know a lot of campaigns this week because we don't often see physical reward campaigns on Kickstarter. We obviously don't often see full game campaigns. To see so many all in one go, I think we're not going to see that for a few weeks either side. So I really wanted to feature a bunch of them, and because they are so cool and so interesting, I had to cut out so many STL file campaigns this week. I cut out a bunch of model campaigns this week, even a game campaign. So if none of these have caught your eye, do stop by Kickstarter. Super busy this week, loads of stuff going on. Well worth giving a look over if you're interested in picking something up sort of prior to Christmas as a last sort of, spending maybe on yourself before starting to buy some gifts. Well worth giving it a look over. That is going to be it for this episode of Rule of Carnage, though. As usual, if you do back any of these campaigns, please swing down to the comment section, let me know which you backed and why. While you're down there, hit the like and subscribes, and then jump over to the Discord. Tell me what you backed, what you're interested in, what your hobby is at the moment, what you're looking forward to in the future. As usual, this Saturday there will be a game design chat with myself and Mike Hutchinson. There's not going to be a hobby video tomorrow, but hopefully next week we'll have one up. And as usual, next week there'll be another Weekly Wednesday roundup. But for now, from me, it's going to be a thank you and goodbye. So thank you and goodbye. Bye-bye.